This afternoon, I just want to welcome you to our meeting on affordable housing down at the Barclays Arena area. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Gerald Marcus Harris. I'm a leadership team member for the Brown Community Development Corporation under the chairmanship of our very own pastor, Clinton Miller. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about is just make sure that everyone is aware of what's going on in our community. I just want to ask people, do you remember the prayer visual that we held? Does anyone remember those things that we did? Making sure that they made good on their promises. Do you remember that? We held it right in front of Barclays. We walked around. As far as what about the protesting outside of the Barclays Center? Okay, and the Brown CDC has countless screenings just so that you are aware of exactly what's going on in your community. And we just want to thank you so much for your support for all of these events, making sure that you're aware of your rights and that everyone as a whole understands everything that's happening. One of the things that we're trying to do is to ensure that we get exactly what was promised to us. The thing is, we were told and promised before of jobs, permanent jobs, actual living wage jobs, and housing all over. And that's not what's happening right now. We need to make sure that we're getting the affordable housing that was promised and the jobs that were promised to us. So what we want to know is, what can you do? What can we do together to ensure that we get everything that was promised to us? One of the people that's here today that I actually want to introduce is Michelle Delahouse, who's the Executive Director of the Fifth Avenue Committee, and Sabine Aronowski, I'm going to say that wrong, Sabine Aronowski, also of the Fifth Avenue Committee. And what they're going to do today is give us a lot of information, tell us what we can't do, what's so necessary to ensure that this job is not something that's in our community, but that it's a part of our community. And so I'm going to turn the floor over to them. Thank you so much.
Good morning, well, good afternoon actually, everybody. I was here in the morning for the service, and I just want to first say thank you very, very much for welcoming me to be part of the service. Absolutely fabulous, fabulous singing, really. And it's just the spirit, the generosity, and the fellowship was really wonderful to be a part of, so thank you for that. So as Marcus said, my name is Michelle Delahouse, and I'm the Executive Director of the Fifth Avenue Committee. And I'm actually going to also invite up Gib Baconi of the Prospect Heights Neighborhood Development Council, because Gib and I and several other individuals that are here are part of a group called Brooklyn Speaks. I'm just going to ask Marjana if she'll push the little thing along there. I think everybody already knows a lot about Brown Memorial CDC, which is really the social activism arm, I believe, is the proper way to describe the church. And really, Brown Memorial CDC has been working with all of us. Marcus mentioned the prayer vigils and the screenings and things like that. That's actually things that we've been doing together with the Fifth Avenue Committee, Prospect Heights Neighborhood Development Council, and several other civic and nonprofit organizations in the neighborhood. So if we go ahead and thank you. So Brooklyn Speaks is a coalition that came together, it says 2006, but the reality is that we were actually working together even before that, just as a loose affiliation of organizations. And all the organizations that are on the left, which are all nonprofit civic groups or community-based organizations or some citywide nonprofit organizations, came together really to ensure that the Atlantic Yards Project was accountable to the public. And that's something that has been consistent in our message throughout. And then just briefly about the Fifth Avenue Committee, I think some people know who we are. But we're a 35-year-old nonprofit comprehensive community development corporation whose mission is to advance economic and social justice. Our office is based in Gowanus, but we actually serve low and moderate income people citywide, although we have a particular focus on community boards 2, 6, 7, and 8. Many of the same community boards that have preference in a future affordable housing lottery for Atlantic Yards. And we have a South Brooklyn Accountable Development Initiative that Sabine coordinates on our behalf. So the reason why we're here is really to share information about the status of the Atlantic Yards project and connect that to a lot of the pressures that many of us see day to day in the neighborhoods about rents going up and feeling like entire neighborhoods are changing in terms of gentrification and displacement. And so actually just last week we had a press conference with all the local elected officials that are listed above, either in person or supporting a statement that basically says that Forest City Ratner Companies, which is the developer of the Atlantic Yards project, who's received hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies, direct or indirect, needs to be held accountable because there's a plan to actually sell. Forest City Ratner announced that they plan to sell 70% stake in the Atlantic Yards project to a Chinese-owned company called Greenland Holdings. So just 70% represents over $3 billion. And so that basically represents Forest City cashing out before any of the major promises, especially on the affordable housing side. There's been zero affordable housing actually created so far, actually being delivered. And so we have a lot of concerns about that, and we wanted to play a clip from the press conference of Assembly Member Walter Mosa, who represents many of the folks here in the room. That way
all of us are aware that a home court has been built for an NBA basketball team. But the reason why New Yorkers invested over $700 million in tax subsidies and abatements is because we wanted to build a home court advantage for Brooklynites. We wanted to build a home court advantage for working class men and women. We wanted to build a home court advantage for the people who made Brooklyn what it is today, a collection of neighborhoods where people accept one another for who they are and what they are. And unfortunately, we are now at a time in which Brooklyn, as it exists today in this particular footprint of this arena, will no longer exist. And obviously, we know that the new New York is open for business, but we need to know that the new New York is open for business for the men and women and children who make Brooklyn what it is today. All of us are aware that a home court has been built.
Sorry. Great, that's it, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Judge. So it goes on longer, and actually we'll share a link with YouTube, which has the entire press conference with everybody. That way you can see it. But Martin, if you don't mind, go to the next slide. I think Gib is going to take this piece here.
Sure. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to speak without a microphone. I'd just rather speak without a microphone because then I can stand here and actually see what I'm talking about. But if you can't hear me, sort of go like this, and then I'll try to speak up a little bit more. As Michelle said, my name is Gib Falcone. I'm with the Prospect Heights Neighborhood Development Council, and have been working with the Fifth Avenue Committee and the Pratt Area Community Council, and thank you very much, and the Park Slope Civic Council, Orem Hill Association, Brooklyn Heights Association, the Atlantic Avenue LDC, and the Brooklyn Speaks Initiative. Now, if you're here today and you live in this community, this is probably not the first time you've heard about the Atlantic Yards project, and it's probably not even the first time that you've heard about the delays in delivery of affordable housing. And so broadly, we're talking about accountability to make good on the promises that were made to get this deal approved and get hundreds of millions of dollars of public subsidy delivered for it. And why should we be here today talking about this? Well, the core reason is because this project is not like other public-private partnerships in the state of New York. The state of New York does many large projects, and as a common thread, they tend to have a board running them that has representatives who understand the community, who are appointed by the local officials that represent that community and can ensure that the promises that are made are fulfilled. Atlantic Yards does not have that type of structure. And because it doesn't have that type of structure, we've seen the deal change from the time it was approved in 2006, in this example, to when it was actually agreed at the master closing in 2009. In only 3 years, we went from having, this is actually not all that easy to read in this projection, but We went from being promised an arena in 15 buildings to an arena in 3 buildings by 2022. We went from having 2,250 affordable apartments by 2016 to just 300 by 2022. And you can kind of go down the line here with the open space being reduced or not even delivered, potentially until generations from now, and down to the point where the economic benefit of this project is no longer even a net positive for the city of New York. So this is what happens when the public isn't represented in a deal with a private developer. And that's why we're here today, and that's what we want your help in trying to change. As I mentioned, Atlantic Yards has received considerable state and city subsidies, over $300 million. There were promised 15,000 construction jobs. This is what's been delivered, the yellow there. About 600 or a little bit more at the height of construction on the arena. Of those, less than 200 were hired from Brooklyn. In terms of permanent jobs, 10,000 jobs were promised, permanent jobs, of which today only 1,240 full-time equivalent positions have been delivered. Now, what that means is you'll often hear Barclays Center talk about having created 2,000 jobs. Those are part-time jobs. They don't have benefits, and they don't pay a living wage. As a matter of fact, when you look at what the subsidy for the arena has been today, the New York City Independent Budget Office believes that the value of the direct and indirect subsidies for the arena alone are worth $720 million. So to create 2,000 part-time jobs that don't pay a living wage means each one of those jobs costs the taxpayers $360,000. That's a lot of money to create a part-time job. What does, when FAC works on workforce development projects, what's a budget for, how does that compare to your experience?
So Fifth Avenue Committee, directly and through our workforce development affiliate, trains and places over 800 people a year with barriers to employment, including criminal histories of homelessness, long gaps in work history. And we actually have one of the most successful workforce training programs in the city of New York, and the average cost is between $5,000 and $6,000 per trainee placed in employment. So that gives you a very big difference in terms of investment and based on outcome, and those are living wage jobs.
And then finally, what we're really here to talk about today is affordable housing. The Atlantic Yards project was supposed to deliver 2,250 units of affordable housing. Now, when we all talk about affordable housing, and you think about 2,000 units of affordable housing, you have an image in your mind, at least I did when I first heard about this project, and that image was of 2,000 families that will get to stay in Brooklyn as it becomes increasingly expensive to live here. But what we found, in fact, is this is not about 2,000 families being allowed to live in Brooklyn. The first building that's going up at the Atlantic Yards site will have 180, quote, affordable apartments. Of those, only less than half will be affordable to people who make an average income in Brooklyn or less. And of those, only 10 will be suitable for families. So what we're showing here is that while Atlantic Yards has yet to deliver any affordable housing, it actually removed 170 units of affordable housing from the community. So there's a net deficit now on the project.
If by suitable for families, you mean that they'll all be studios or one bedroom?
There will be 10 two-bedroom apartments in building B2 that are in the affordable, that are affordable to families making at or below the median income in Brooklyn.
Which is?
It's approximately $46,000. And that's significant because, in fact, overall, there are about 36 two-bedroom apartments that are part of the affordable apartments, quote, affordable apartments. But for more than half of those apartments, to qualify, you can make up to $120,000 a year. Now, New York is an expensive place to live, but for most of us, when we think about affordable housing and public subsidies, we don't necessarily think of an income of $120,000 as needing the public to subsidize living. We're very concerned about being able to deliver on that component of the public benefits from Atlantic Yard. Now, Michelle mentioned earlier the Greenland Holdings transaction. Last month, Forest City Ratner announced their intention to sell a majority interest in the Atlantic Yards project to a company called Greenland Holdings, which is owned by the government of China. This is a real concern, given the fact there's almost no oversight on the Atlantic Yards project. Sorry about that. As we've been discussing, we've worked, the advocates here have worked for 6 years now, 7 years actually, to try to get governance reform done at Atlantic Yards, to get representation so as the project moves forward, the benefits get delivered. We have not been successful. We've been fought by Forest City Ratner. We've had other challenges to try to change that representation. We're not done yet, but we're very concerned that if a foreign developer ends up owning a majority interest in the Atlantic Yards project, a foreign government, one located halfway around the world, will have more say in when affordable housing gets built for people in Brooklyn than the elected officials who represent us. And that's just not right. So that's why, together with the elected representatives from this part of Brooklyn, both city, state, and federal, we've called upon the state not to approve this deal until alternatives can be studied to show that this is, in fact, the best deal for the people in Brooklyn, number one. Number two, that there are a new set of written commitments as part of the project agreements that put the affordable housing back on schedule the way it was initially promised. And number three, that we finally reform the oversight of this project. And so we won't be here again in 5 years wondering why the housing still hasn't been delivered. So we spoke a second ago about B2. This is again a breakdown of affordability in building B2. There's nothing secret about this. This is the information that's on the Atlantic Yards website. It's Forest City's website. But you can see how a very, very small number of the total affordable apartments are actually affordable to people who make the median income. In this case, we used Community Board 8 as an example. This is another reason why the representatives of this community need to be at the table when decisions are made about how the project moves forward. Otherwise, this sort of affordability and a 35-year or a 25-year construction schedule, the people who end up occupying affordable apartments here will likely be people who displaced current residents of our community. And I'm gonna pass on this slide actually, unless Michelle, you want to talk about AMI?
Sure. I'm going to just pick up the pace a little bit because I want to make sure we have enough time to also break into groups and talk. But how affordable housing works is that area median income is used, is a standard that's established by HUD in Washington to determine the local affordability of projects. So in New York, the metro area median income isn't just the 5 boroughs of the city of New York, it also includes parts of Westchester and Long Island. So basically what that means is, as you can see in 2000, the HUD New York metro area median income was $57,000 a year for a family of 4. In Community Board 8, it was $35,000. So in order to get to Brooklyn's AMI in 2000, you have to do about between 60 and 80% of the area median income in order to make something affordable to Brooklyn residents. But as you can see, and I think we all know this based on the fact that gentrification and displacement is happening at a very rapid rate, rate, and that incomes for some people are going way, way up, and for others, they're kind of staying stagnant. And that's what was going on. You can see it. In 2010, the area median income was over $70,000 a year for a family of 4, but in Community Board 8, it was only 45. So it went up 22% for the area-wide in the metro, but only 17% in Community Board 8. And so in order to keep projects affordable to residents in Community Board 8, you have to even go to a deeper level of affordability. 50% of area median income or below, and that becomes quite challenging. You can keep going. And this is something, this is some information that Fifth Avenue Committee did that just looks at the change in demographics, particularly in Community Board 8, using census data starting in 1990, looking at what happened in 2000 and then 2010, and then doing a level of projection of what that might look like moving forward if those current trends continue. So the darker brown represents African Americans, and the lighter color represents Latinos and Asian Americans, and you can see the white populations in between. So in 1990, in Community Board 8, 83% of the population was African American, 10% was Latino, and 5% was white. Using the 2010 census numbers, African American population had already dropped down to 65% of the population. Latinos had gone up to 12, whites had gone up to 17%. And then if you project, if that trend continues forward, then African Americans drop close to 50%, and actually some preliminary research suggests it's even lower than that, based on the pace of displacement that's going on, and whites and Latinos become a larger percentage. So why is this important? It's important because when the project was approved and actually signed contracts, the state allowed for City Ratner to say, we're going to take 25 years to build that affordable housing instead of building it in the first 10. So for every 5 or 10 years that the project gets delayed, that means that the folks that needed the housing when it was first approved are no longer around to benefit from it. That's very significant, extremely significant. So, how affordable housing works is that generally where a project is built, the residents of the local community boards get a 50% preference for a housing lottery. And this project, because it's being built with government subsidy dollars, is subject to a housing lottery. And I can tell you, having run a few for the Fifth Avenue Committee, that there's much, much more demand than there is supply. So for instance, we completed a project across the street from the Barclays Center, Atlantic Terrace, which was a homeownership project. We had 59 affordable apartments, over 5,000 people applied. But we had a 50% preference for Community Board 2 residents. And so that helped. That basically meant that anybody who was income eligible and could get a mortgage, because that was a homeownership project, that was in Community Board 2, their name rises to the top of the list. So these are the community boards that have preference for Atlantic Yards. And I think those percentages that I just gave previously were for Community Board 8, which is this community board, Prospect Heights and Crown Heights, which is the racial makeup of the community is changing dramatically, as it is for Community Boards 3. 2 and 6, a lot of that change has already happened, honestly. The wave of gentrification in Community Boards 2 and 6 happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, but it's now hitting Community Boards 8 and 3. So, Fifth Avenue Committee and 5 other plaintiffs were successful in winning a lawsuit requiring the state to do a supplemental environmental impact statement to look at the impacts of the delay for phase 2 of the project. Phase 2 of the project is basically 6th Avenue to Vanderbilt. It's the biggest chunk of the project. It's where most of the housing will be delivered. Most of those jobs would be delivered, where the open space would be delivered. And we're still waiting to hear back, to receive an actual, what they call an SEIS, which will look at the impact of those delays. But we have a number of ideas to try to make the project more accountable, and Giz already reviewed a bunch of them. So, but they include opening the project up to other folks, have competitive bidding. Because part of the challenge when you have a $4 billion plus project is that that's a lot of risk for one developer to assume. And if you have multiple developers involved, that means you can share the risk. And that's one of the reasons why they want to sell part of the equity up. I'm actually going to turn this part over to Marjana. Because this is the part where we're going to ask you to get involved. Because we're calling on a couple things. We're at a very particular moment in time as it relates to this Greenland deal, and we want to make sure that Governor Cuomo and Ken Adams, who happens to be from Brooklyn and is the head of the New York State Empire State Development Corporation, know that we care about this issue, and then we want to hear some stories.
Thank you, Michelle, and Gary from Brooklyn Speech and Endowment Committee. Yes, there was a lot of information, yes? Okay, so bottom line is this is not a new issue here at Brown. People have been talking about this development since it first started, right? Many of us last summer and last fall were out there protesting and rallying. We talked about the prayer vigil that we had. There was a number of rallies that happened for the whole week before the stadium, before the arena actually opened. And what happened after that? Huh? Nothing, right? Governor Cuomo was silent. The mayor just kept talking about how great it was. And from the developer, we got hurry up and wait, it's coming. And with the demographic shifts that Michelle just talked about, we can't afford to hurry up and wait. We won't be here. That is a serious issue. It's really easy to talk about percentages and to talk about numbers, but what about the emotional investment in our communities? What about putting faces to those numbers of people that are supposed to be getting this affordable housing that still doesn't exist, right? So we need, story sharing, people like, oh, that's all kumbaya and everything, but honestly, we need to put a face to all of this information. People need to know that it is us, it is our families. Some of us have been here for generations, right? And are facing a point where we may need to leave because we're being priced out and we're being pushed out. So we have to connect people's stories to this information. We also have to sign this petition to send a strong message to our governor, right? If we can't hold Forest City Ratner, the developer, accountable around this project, how are we supposed to hold a foreign corporation that has no investment in Brooklyn, knows nothing about the working people of Brooklyn, and knows nothing about the needs of people that need affordable housing, right? We have to remain vigilant. Again, there was a press conference almost 2 weeks ago. At that press conference, we had elected officials from every level of government. We had city council there, we had state assembly, state senate, and we had our Congress people there. That is the first time that I've heard that much unity from our elected officials around this project, and they were all demanding that this housing get built fast, that it be family friendly, and that it be real affordability. Not some $100,000 affordable, but real affordability. So right now we want to start to have a conversation. We want to hear from you all that live in this area, either community boards 2, 3, 6, and 8. We want to be able to just hear what the frustrations people are dealing with, or maybe you have stories that we are not aware of. So we want to get this conversation going, but before then, I do want to acknowledge that we're being joined by our female district leader, Renee Collmore.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for your support. So, I know there's a lot of people here, but please, who would like to share something right now? Either a reaction to what you've heard or what you've been seeing happening in your own community regarding being priced out and pushed out. Don't be shy. Yes?
Well, I've been in this neighborhood since 1966. I certainly couldn't afford to live here now if I hadn't been there for that long. one of the things that strikes me is that the Atlantic Yards piece, the Atlantic Yards is just one